Now we time travel back to one NBA offseason ago. The Minnesota Timberwolves left us all in shock after having their most successful postseason run in franchise history. They go out and they trade one of their franchise cornerstones and Karl Anthony Towns to the New York Knicks, and in exchange they bring back Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. And at the time, it didn't make no sense to any of us because, like we just stated, the Minnesota Timberwolves were coming off their deepest playoff run in franchise history, and then also it seemed like Karl Anthony Towns was just such a big part of their identity, playing two bigs, and then his ability to stretch the floor, and then they were so good on the defensive side of the ball. And at the time, I didn't see the vision that the Minnesota Timberwolves front office was creating when they brought in Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle. And then it was kind of hard to judge the Minnesota Timberwolves throughout the regular season because they did have some moments where they were going through adversity with their injuries, missing guys like Julius Randle, missing guys like Rudy Gobert. So we fast forward to this postseason and we figure out what these round one matchups were going to be. And I was very excited because we get to see the Minnesota Timberwolves face off against the Los Angeles Lakers. It doesn't really get any better than this when it comes to first round matchups because we look at this series. There's a legit 3 NBA superstars, and when I say superstars, these are guys that people lose their mind over, and those 3 players are Anthony Edwards, LeBron James, and Luka Doncic. And hell, we might even be able to throw Nas Reed in there, how popular he is with the Minnesota Timberwolves. But nonetheless, when you get guys together like this, it's going to make for great basketball, great TV. And when we have a series like this, it's something that's talked about a lot. This is one of the premier series of the first round. And when we're having these conversations about these series, when people are analyzing it, talking about it, one thing we love to do is try to predict who's going to win. And hearing all of these predictions, now I'm not going to say that people were saying that the Minnesota Timberwolves were, and I'm one of these people as well, we weren't saying that the Minnesota Timberwolves were just going to come out here and get spanked, but it seemed like everyone was leaning towards the Los Angeles Lakers, and it's like we fell in love with this combination of LeBron James and Luka Doncic that we forgot to consider all of the other things that go into playoff basketball. Number one, I don't know how we were forgetting to look at the personnel between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Minnesota Timberwolves, because we look at these two teams from top to bottom. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves, they have the better team, they have the deeper team, and they have better role players. And then also we forgot to consider matchups and we forgot to consider lineups. And I think these 3 things right here for the Minnesota Timberwolves have been the reason why they are in the prime position that they are in right now, being up 3-1, while the Los Angeles Lakers have home court advantage in this series, or I should say they had home court advantage in this series. But looking at these first 4 games, and it is making a lot of sense why the Minnesota Timberwolves made the trade that they made, because I think they become a better team, but more importantly, they become a more versatile team. And with the personnel that they have now, they now have that ability to throw out a bunch of different lineups given the situation, given the teams that they are playing against. And that's something that we've seen so far in this first round matchup against the Los Angeles Lakers. But before we get into that, I just want to, we compare the 2 big heads in that trade between the New York Knicks and the Minnesota Timberwolves. We look at Julius Randle versus Karl Anthony Towns. Now, when you look at their numbers, both guys' numbers are very, very similar. Like, one guy wasn't drastically outproducing the other when it came to these two, but when it comes to a fit, when I what's the word I'm looking for? When I'm looking at Julius Randle and Karl Anthony Towns as just their basketball players, just as their skill sets, I actually like the fit of Julius Randle a little bit better for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, the one thing I look at is the spacing that Julius Randle provides versus Karl Anthony Towns. Now, Cat, he might be a slightly better 3-point shooter, but that's not all that spacing is. Now, with Rudy Gobert and Cat playing a lot of minutes alongside each other, or with Cat playing alongside Nas Reed, even, you have Cat lingering out a lot on that 3-point line. He can knock down that 3-point shot with the best of them. But when they're facing teams that are just as athletic, or have somebody that can close out to Cat and rotate to Cat, and he's repeatedly having to put the ball on the floor, which is something that he's capable of, but it's not a strong suit of Karl Anthony Towns. And if you can get him repeatedly putting the basketball on the floor, trying to get to the inside all the way from the 3-point line. It could clunk things up for a little bit for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and it could throw off the spacing, and then their offense could get stagnant. So where when you have Julius Randle, to where he might not be as good as a pure shooter as Karl Anthony Towns, but guys are not leaving him wide open to shoot the 3-point shot, so he can stretch the floor. But when he does have guys closing out to him, he's much more efficient at putting the basketball on the floor, getting downhill, and he's a much better passer than Karl Anthony Towns as well. Even though their assist numbers might look the same, but as far as a natural playmaker, I feel like Julius Randle is much better than Karl Anthony Towns. So you have that on the offensive side of the ball, and then really an upgrade defensively as well when you think about it. Now, it's no secret that Karl Anthony Towns, he was never known as a defensive player. Same thing with Julius Randle, but when we compare these two players, we look at Julius Randle being 6'9", being 250 pounds. If he's in a team that has a defensive system like the Minnesota Timberwolves, he can be one hell of a weapon on the defensive side of the ball. And not to say that Cat, when he was with the Minnesota Timberwolves last year, they had one of the best defenses in all of the NBA, and Cat, for the most part, was giving effort on the defensive side of the ball. But now you have a guy in Julius Randle who's 6'9", 250 pounds, fairly athletic. You could put him in many different spots on the basketball court, and you're not going to have guys coming out trying to hunt for Julius Randle like they would Karl Anthony Towns. And now we look at this situation where the Minnesota Timberwolves, a lot of the times they're going to have a lineup out there where teams are really not going to know who they're going to try to mismatch hunt for, because they might try to do it to Mike Conley because he's the smallest guy on the court, but that's not really something you want to do, because Mike Conley, like, he's a willing defender. He's made all NBA defensive teams before. So I love the upgrade that Julius Randle, or I love the versatility that Julius Randle gives the Minnesota Timberwolves on both the offensive and the defensive side of the ball. I think swapping out Julius Randle for Cat makes their small ball lineup better when they want to go with Naz Reid and Julius Randle at that 4-5 position. So you have that, and also the addition of Donte DiVincenzo, another player that helps that spacing problem that the Minnesota Timberwolves were going through last season. Donte DiVincenzo is a legit sniper. Last year with the New York Knicks, he broke their record for the most threes made in a single regular season. So he can shoot the blood out of the basketball, but he also just adds to that versatility that the Minnesota Timberwolves have now. He's another player that can do so many things. He can run your offense off the bench as a full-time point guard, and then you can also bring him in down the stretch, play him next to the Ant-Man as an off guard, or as a combo guard. So I love the addition of Donte DiVincenzo. He's also very scrappy on the defensive side of the ball. So we have these two new additions for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and two players has given these guys so much versatility, because now we look at this series so far where they're up 3-1 against the Los Angeles Lakers. The Minnesota Timberwolves, they have a guy by the name of Rudy Gobert on their team. He has won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards, and I wouldn't say he's been a non-factor in this series. That's just untrue, but he's not playing heavy playoff minutes like you would expect. Like the 4-time Defensive Player of the Year for this series so far, he's probably only averaging 24, 26 minutes per game, because we all know, it's no secret, he struggled against Luka Doncic. Luka hunts him in the pick and roll, and Rudy Gobert and Luka Doncic, that's just not a matchup that you want outside on the perimeter. So the Timberwolves, they are tolerated for a little bit, and Rudy Gobert, he gives a lot of effort out there in the perimeter, and if Luka makes a tough shot, he makes a tough shot. You tip your cap off to that. But the Minnesota Timberwolves, they've been blessed enough to go to these lineups where they can get super athletic, put a bunch of athletes out on the court, they can switch everything, they can trap a lot easier, they can rotate a lot easier, and it just makes things a lot tougher on the offensive and the defensive side of the ball. When you have a Julius Randle at the 4, or you have a Julius Randle at the 5, or you have Julius Randle at the the 4, and Nas Reed at the 5. And then with this lineup, you have Jaden McDaniels, you have Anthony Edwards, you have Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So that lineup right there, like, that's an extremely athletic lineup. Or we could take out Nickeil Alexander-Walker and put in Dante DiVincenzo, where they get a little bit more explosive on the offensive side of the ball. So the Minnesota Timberwolves, they've been very impressive this season. It was a lot of question marks around Julius Randle. He didn't have the best rep for the postseason, but it seems like being with the Minnesota Timberwolves, being next to the Ant-Man, has refreshed him a lot, has given him a lot of confidence, as he's been lights out in this series so far against the Los Angeles Lakers, knocking down at least 2 threes in every game except for game 2, I believe it was. Playing lights out in every game except for game 2. He's averaging over 20 points for this series. He's averaging over 4 assists, and he's also has a true shooting percentage of 60. It's at least before game 4. I haven't checked it. Before game 4 went down, he had a true shooting percentage of 65%. So he's been playing lights out. Jaden McDaniels has been playing lights out in this series. Anthony Edwards has been playing like a superstar in this series, and these are the reasons why the Minnesota Timberwolves are up 3-1 right now. They're a much versatile team. They can go super big if they need to. They can go small if they need to. They can throw out a lineup if they need to get points in a hurry, and then they can also throw out a nasty defensive lineup. So I'm loving this lineup versatility by the Minnesota Timberwolves, and that's what I want to talk about with you guys today. If you guys enjoyed, please leave a like, comment down below how you feel about the Minnesota Timberwolves in the postseason so far, and then subscribe for more weekly content. We do this all the time, man, and that's curtains.